Well, good afternoon. We're ready here to begin our third week audio and video lecture. And if you look at the text, I'm going to here in just a second, we are in what is known as part 3 of the text, business management, empowering employees to satisfy customers. Now we're going to look at chapter 7, 8, and 9 tonight. Chapter 7, management and leadership. Chapter 8, structuring organizations for today's challenges. And then chapter 9, production and operations management. So let's begin and look at the learning goals for chapter 7. Describe the changes occurring in today's management function. Occurring today in the management function, Describe the 4 functions of management, relate the planning process and decision-making to accomplishment of company goals. Describe the organizing function of management, explain the differences between leaders and managers, and describe the various leadership styles, and then finally, summarize the 5 steps of the control function of management. So let's begin. What's management? It is, notice what it says here. It says it's the process. And I suppose it is the process of helping an organization meet its goals through the 4 functions of management: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And notice that it says here controlling people. That would be controlling employees. But more important to me is the latter part of that, and that is controlling the organization's resources. And we'll talk about that and try to make that distinction when we get to the organizing part of the four functions, or organizing piece of 4 functions, which is the latter part of this chapter. Let me scroll down here a second and get to the next slide. Notice what it says here. That today's today's managers are younger, they're more aggressive. We see more women, and actually not only does it say aggressive, but it also says progressive. Now, what does progressive mean? Progressive means a lot of things to a lot of people. And we can look at the dictionary and see what the definition of progressive is. It means a person who is thinking forward, acting forward versus his or her peers. Well, I think progressive, as far as management goes today, is the manager is treating the employee like he or she has something of value to offer to the company. I'm going to say this now, and I will probably repeat it once or twice more before we get through this course, maybe more often. Employees are organization's most important resource. Okay? Maybe you prefer the term asset, but resource is correct. And we need to treat those employees, those people, those folks, those individuals with respect. And when we don't do that, then we find employees who will goof off. Now, they'll goof off in many various and sundry ways. Some will actually try to do harm to the company. Others just won't put in a full effort. Other people will work to the rule, which we normally hear about unions, but they'll do that in an organization. They come in if it's 9 to 5, they'll come in at 9 and they'll leave at 5. They won't stay. They won't come in any sooner, and they won't leave any sooner. Or any later, excuse me. Now, yeah, that's if we're talking about people who punch a time card or have to sign in, we can expect that. But good employees tend to stay a little over, tend to come in a little earlier, because that's what they want to do. Notice the next bullet, there's an emphasis on teams and team building. We Americans are late to teams. We are an individualistic society. We've been founded on that. We have so many things. But one thing that ties us together through all our different national origins in this country is individualism. And we pride ourselves on that. And we are a group of people who always look for the silver bullet to get to the salient point, to solve the crisis, and move on to the next one. We don't tend to have a long-term outlook. That has been changing recently, so I think we'll see more emphasis on teams. And the last part is that managers have to really be into communication. Now, what we found is with the advent of this medium that I'm using here tonight, the PC, and what goes along with the PC, we find that we have fewer managers in the workplace today because one of the things that managers did for years was to communicate with employees. And they had to do that by voice for the most part, which means they had to be face-to-face. There was some written, certainly. But now we have this ability to connect, not only here, but with social media and all sorts of other things, to connect immediately with our employees. So we don't need as many managers. And we've seen the managers, especially the middle managers, the numbers have lessened over the last 10 or 15 years, maybe even going back as far as 20 years. So they have to be good communicators. And they have to get the message across the way it's supposed to be delivered. Now, this talks about respect and how to get it. And notice that the two at the top in percentages are one, strong management. If somebody might change that to strong leadership, but there's a difference between the two, and we'll try to talk about it a little bit. And then sound business strategy. Followed by ethical practices and on down. So what this simply means is that you need to have good, sound leadership. It doesn't mean this kind of leadership. It means good, sound leadership, so people understand what is expected, and that's clearly articulated. That goes back to the communication piece. And of course, a sound business strategy. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, everybody in the organization has to know how their piece, their job, their position fits into the overall scheme of things and how it supports the organization, values, mission, goals, and objectives. This education matters. It talks about the alma mater CEOs. Notice that the School of Hard Knocks is tied with the University of California. Most people know who Steve Jobs was. Very few people know who William Johnson was or is. Most of us know Steve Ballmer, who graduated from Harvard. His colleague, chairman of the board at Microsoft, who went to Harvard but did not graduate. And then there's some others in here that you may well know. All right, now here are the 4 functions of management, graphically displayed for you again, as we've spoken about them: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Now, the first thing that comes before we get to any of those things is an organization's vision. The vision is not a goal, and it should not be thought of as a goal. It's telling the outside world why we exist. Some of that will say what business we're in. Some of that will say what we want to accomplish. And of course, part of that will also be in the mission statement. And it will tell those folks who pay attention, most don't, but I'm talking about the outside world, most don't, where we expect to go. And perhaps, although not too much because that's a little detailed, it may say how we intend to get there. Now, after you have the vision, which is a broad statement, you come up with the organization's mission, and that tells the world, the outside world, our purpose, what we're here for. And notice what it includes. It includes philosophy. It includes customer needs. Notice it includes social responsibility. And I think that we need to say that up as a follow-on to Chapter 4 and to some of the review comments we got from the video of Chapter 4, Cell Phones for Soldiers. It says social responsibility. Now, I would say to you that you probably could go back 50 or 60 years ago, not that I would have paid attention 50 or 60 years ago, certainly not 60 years ago anyway, to the mission statement. And we probably didn't see as much social responsibility, but consumers today and stakeholders are demanding that corporations have a social responsibility statement. One of the reasons a corporation wants to do this is because then it has a greater claim on the resources that can be taken from the environment. We find organizations today like Procter & Gamble and Sara Lee and some of those that are doing things like lean manufacturing, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Pardon me. And also going green. We have one universe that we live in. We live on. We're part of a universe, but we only live on one part of it. As we know, if you're paying attention, we find that some of our resources are declining. We find that glaciers are retreating. We find that the Arctic is warming. As a matter of fact, I saw a graphic picture in the New York Times on, I think it was on Saturday, it might have been on Friday. It was an article about global warming, and it showed part of a participant in the Iditarod sled race. I don't remember the start point and the end point of it, but this guy was mushing his team over ground, not over snow and ice, over regular ground. So that there wasn't that much snowfall there. I mean, there's still a lot of snowfall, but not what we would expect. And then finally, the nature of the product or service, that's also going to be in the mission statement. And then from the mission statement, we're going to get the next two things. We're going to get goals and objectives. And the goals are, notice that they're broad, long-term. Yeah, it says here accomplishments. I didn't want to use that word. Long-term ideas, ideals, things of that nature that we want to accomplish. And then the objectives are the short-term indications. And we usually do this in writing, but that writing will be internal, will not be external. The goals may be up for people to see, but the objectives will be internal. And they tend to be short-term. And then they spell out how we are going to achieve the goals. And depending upon the level that you are in the organization, those objectives become more specific and the timeline becomes shorter. One of the ways that an organization comes up with its goals and objectives is to go through what's known as a SWOT analysis, standing for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, the goal of a SWOT analysis, and before we get to the strategic and tactical planning, etc., the goal of the SWOT analysis is to change weaknesses into strengths, to change threats into opportunities. Now, when I say that, especially the threat part, That does not mean to say we should not acknowledge threats or that we should ignore them or hope they go away. Now, for instance, if you're an XYZ business and you have a competitor who has a product that maybe is a little better than yours, is providing better service, is selling for a lower cost, any number of things that corporation is doing, that's a threat, and that threat's not going to go away. So we have to do something. Now, we can't do anything to the threat itself that's going to exist. That's competition. And we know that most of the time, competition makes us better because it makes us work harder. So what we're going to do is we're going to address those threats in some fashion. We're going to do something about the cost. We're going to do something about product. Maybe we're going to do something about service, et cetera, et cetera. So we may do everything there that is considered to be a threat to us, a threat to our longevity, and a threat to our well-being. I want to apologize to you. I just noticed that I was on the telephone. I'd not put the telephone on, so we've lost about 10 or so minutes of audio. I apologize for that. But we really have not gotten into the meat of this, so I hope we're okay. Again, I apologize for missing the opportunity at the beginning to talk about things loudly and clearly so that you could hear them. That's a fault I have, and I apologize for that. So we get to our goals by doing 4 types of planning: strategic, tactical, operational, and contingency. Now we're going to do various different types of those at various different levels. By the way, this is the SWOT matrix. You can see this graphically displayed in figure 7.2 at the bottom of page 184. And I'm not going to go through this. It's not as easy to read here. As I've mentioned before, I'm going to try this. I used to have the ability to enlarge the graphic here, but I don't have that ability anymore. At least I can't find it. So you can look at this in the text on page 184. So that's the SWOT analysis. And then we're going to talk about the 4 types of planning functions that we mentioned just a couple minutes ago: strategic, tactical, operational, and contingency. Strategic planning, the best way to say this to you is it is set by the executives of the corporation. These are normally considered to be broad range goals, what we want to accomplish, and a time frame in which we want to accomplish them. The time frame may be a little loose, it may not be, it's depending. Once that is articulated, the strategic plan, the overarching plan, then we go to the tactical plan. And here we have short-term operational goals, if you will, and they are set by the next level of managers down. Now, the text says by lower level managers. Good evening, Ms. Brown. The text talks about lower level managers, but don't think of that as being far down the line. I like to think of it as being next after the executive folks. And then we get to the operational planning, and that is down where, lack of a better term, the rubber meets the road, and we're setting, we, the manager or supervisor in a particular department or departments, is setting specific timetables and setting standards that have not already been set to accomplish these things. And then, so we have overall picture coming down into the identifying the short-term objectives, short range objectives, maybe that's a better way to say that, and then down to the operational planning where, as I said, where the rubber meets the road. Now, even though we have these, and that's usually pretty well set, pretty well followed in most organizations. We always have to have a contingency plan. That's a fallback plan, if you will, in case something that we've planned for doesn't work for conditions that we did not expect or for unforeseen circumstances. And this just gives us a little bit more here on the strategic and tactical planning. Kind of talked about this before. I'm going to leave it up here for just a second or two so we can kind of look at that. I think the biggest thing is the two biggest things to take away from these two bullets is that the strategic planners have a requirement. Now, notice I'm using the word requirement, and they may not think of it that way, but I like to think of it that way. They have the requirement, maybe duty's a better word, to make sure that the resources needed to carry out the goals are there for the people that need to have them who are going to do the work. And then again, just tactical is short term, and it's kind of like who's supposed to do this, etc. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we get to the operational, and we talked about this before, setting work standards and schedules. And then the contingency plan is an alternative. If things don't work out, if we can't get the needed material and resources that we need, what are we going to do? What's our fallback position, etc. Now, this is just talking about a Japanese crisis, terrorism, and American businesses. We know that, unfortunately, we have people in this world who, if they do not get the way they want, or get what they want the way they want it, they're going to resort to some type of violence. We find it with the Islamic State. We find it with a number of other organizations. And we find it here within our own country, unfortunately. People don't like certain things, and so they're anti-government, or they want to do other kinds of things, take law into their own hands, etc. So we have that. We have to be cognizant of it. We have to be aware of it, and we have to plan. That's what part of a contingency plan is for disruptions of business. The next term we come to, or next subject we want to address and talk to is decision making. And decision making is simply making a choice between at least two alternatives. And we have to do a lot of homework, if you will, to determine how we're going to get or make the choice that we want to make that's going to give us the biggest payback for our effort. This is just talking about what makes a great CEO, decision-making skills at the top. The folks at the top have to have a great amount of conceptual skill, and be able to look at the big picture, to think through things, to make changes that are necessary, to make sure that they're implemented properly. And of course, that would be making sure that there's enough resources to take care of what needs to be taken care of. And then to do a lot of, well, it doesn't say it here, I'll say it, a lot of fence mending. Normally speaking, when you have some kind of a change that you're going to bring, I'm using change here, you're going to have resistance, and that's just, humans are like that. And they get set in their ways, and they like doing what they're doing, and they don't like to be upset. Now, we may think that we're as welcome and as open to change as just like turning on a light switch, on or off. The fact of the matter is, most of us aren't. That doesn't mean everybody is, but most of us aren't. So we get into routines. We like things the way they are, and we say something. I remember years ago. This is a little quick story. I was working in a clinical laboratory, and we had moved from our old location and on into a new place, and it was modern and up to date and a few other things. And we had not put things commonality. If you're going to do some kind of a procedure, you ought to be able to have the things that you need to do the procedure at hand rather than walking across the room or around a corner or something of that nature. So I got tired one day of walking across the room, and I made all these changes. And I told everybody I worked with what I'd done. It's okay. So I told the boss I'd done that too, and just so he would know, because occasionally he came out and helped us, or maybe we'd be short staffed or something like that, and he'd have to help. And his response was, "Well, if it stands the test of time." And I thought, I was thinking, I put things in order so you don't have to go someplace else to get the material you need and the utensils you need to perform a test. Well, that just gives you an idea, that everybody's not ready for change. And I don't mean that to be bad, but that's a fact of life. So this is what we call the rational decision-making model. I love this because I hope that no one would ever make an irrational decision on purpose. I'm sure they do, but on purpose. So this is what we call the rational decision-making model. You can see this outlined on page 187 in the text. And I'm not going to go through all of this because it's all here. It's rather clear, but I want to highlight a couple things. We have to know what the issue is. Now, I like to digress here and talk about a car dealer. I've always used this as an example. And the car dealer's general manager comes to him and says, our sales are down. And so the dealer, the owner, calls a meeting of all his people, and he said, the general manager says, our sales are down. What's the problem? What's the issue? And somebody says, well, we're in a bad location. Somebody says, we don't have a good product. Somebody says our service is bad. Somebody says our sales staff is untrained. And you can add anything that you want. Well, to me, every one of the things that I say are symptoms of a greater issue, which we do not know what it is based upon the short amount of information that I provided to you. I'm not asking you to try to figure this out. Probably the biggest issue was we don't have a good product, or we're in a bad location. We'll talk about when we get to marketing later on, and location here for manufacturing. That's very, very, very important. So we have to know what this is, what the situation is. I like to say what the issue is. We could say problem. We need to get every piece of information that we can that is germane to this issue. And then we have to develop alternatives, and there's ways to do that, showing us what's going to give us our biggest payback for what we want to do. Is it going to be fair to all of our constituents? We need to bring the ethical aspect into it as well. Then we need to figure out which of the alternatives is the best. And that's kind of said that again, but before, but repeat it again. Then we need to implement the choice that we've made. And then after it's been implemented, we need to evaluate it to make sure we did what we should have done. So there's a lot that goes on in this process, and we really have to do that. And the one thing I didn't mention, which I should have mentioned, that is to get agreement, or buy-in is perhaps a better word, from everybody who's going to be involved in this. So what this says to you, or it should say to you, is the decision should not be made in a vacuum. That doesn't mean to say that there aren't times when the boss has to make a decision and he doesn't have time for input. That's going to happen. But everything being equal, if you have this, you have to go through this, the steps in this decision-making model. Now, these are problem-solving techniques that you can go through. You can go through brainstorming, which if you have time, and then you have a problem-solving technique, and this mentions brainstorming here, and also PMI, which you can see listed here at the bottom. PMI kind of is like using your checkbook. You list the pluses and minuses in one column, and obviously in one column and one in the other column. And then the third column you use for implications of what you want to do. All right, just a second here. kind of put myself out of where I wanted to be. All right. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. This is an organizational chart. When I was in the Army, we used to call them a wiring diagram, and it just shows persons' positions, people's positions, maybe it's a better way of saying it, and reporting relationships. One thing we should remember about organizational charts is that they are not static. In other words, they don't remain that way. You may have some companies, maybe at the higher echelons, where that organizational chart will tend to stay for some period of time. But a lot of times, as you move down the organizational hierarchy, those positions and reporting relationships will change rather frequently. This is another slide that you can see on page 188 in your text, levels of management. And it's like a pyramid. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. Obviously, you have the chief executive officer and his folks that report directly to him, the other executive officers at the top, and you have middle management. Then you have what it shows here as supervisory management, and then finally you have those who are not in supervisory or management. They're the action folks, as I like to mention them, people, pardon me, who are down where the rubber meets the road. And this just is a graphic display here, a little further explanation of what the slide says, the chart says in the text, the figure, and gives you a little bit more insight. Supervisory, I think, is probably the one that might need a little further explanation. It talks about those are the folks who are actually directing the work, the production, if you will. And there's top management. I'm not going to go through that. That's fairly self-explanatory. And then this is a very good slide, America's most powerful female managers. I would prefer to say that America's most powerful chief executive officers. Indra Novi, who is at PepsiCo, she's been at PepsiCo for a good number of years. And then we have the one that I like best is Ursula Burns, who is with Xerox. Ursula Burns is a minority, besides being a female. And she is the first CEO in the United States who succeeded another woman who was CEO, Anne Mulcahy, who is, I believe, chairman of the board right now. She may not any longer be there, but she handed over the reins to Ursula Burns. And Ursula Burns, she's profiled here in the text. A very interesting story about her, how she went to work at Xerox and rose through the hierarchy. And then there's some others in here that we may not know as well. And some of this may be outdated because this slide goes back to 2011. We're now in 2015. But I can tell you the woman at PepsiCo is still there. I can tell you Ursula Burns is still in her position. This particular slide here talks about managerial skills. And you can see the figure 7.5 at the bottom of page 189, and that'll be replicated by another slide we have in a few minutes. This is an inverted, the way I want to speak to it is inverted from the way I'm going to speak to it. I like to speak about the CEOs and chief executive and the executive staff first. Not to say that they're any more important than anyone else, but if they don't have conceptual skills, if they can't see down the road of where we want to go and how we want to get there and things of that nature, the organization is going to be in some kind of flux because it's not going to have strong leadership from the top. So those folks have to have some technical skill. They have to have a little bit more, and we're talking here on percentages, a little bit more in the relationship area, human relations, and a great deal of this conceptual skill. the folks at the next level, the middle managers have to have a greater proportion of technical skill than the executives do, have to have at least as good as an amount of human relations skills, maybe a little bit more than the executives do, and have to have conceptual skills, but not in the same proportion. Now, does this mean that any of these people couldn't have larger than what we put them in pools? Absolutely. It doesn't mean we're sticking them in certain areas, but what we're saying is, based upon the positions that they hold in the company, they need greater or lesser these skills. And then the folks at the bottom rung, where the rubber meets the road, they have to have a great amount of technical skill, lesser conceptual skills on the end, but a fair amount of human relations skills because they're working with their peers and cohorts, and they have to be able to get along. And this is doubly important if they're working in teams. Here's the great way to get anything done. 2 words: thank you. Or I appreciate your help. That's a little bit if you're going for something else. But we really do need to say that to people when they help us, even to the smallest extent. Thank you for your assistance. Thanks, thank you. And that just goes a long, long, long way. This is the slide I was speaking about. Again, you can see that on page 189 in your text, and I'm not going to spend any more time on that. Staffing, and we're going to talk more about staffing when we get to the human resource management chapter, which will be next week. But we need to spend a good deal of time, if we're in an organization, making sure we do this right. It's costly to hire people. It's costly, well, excuse me, let me go back. It's costly to recruit people. It's costly to hire people. It's costly to put them in the right positions. And if any of that's done wrong, you have to start the whole process over. So we need to make sure we recruit the best we can, and then we're going to select the best of the best. Very important to do that. And then look at this next part down here at the bottom. Many people don't want to work for companies that they know, I have to put it that way, that they know don't treat employees well and don't offer good pay. 3 ways to attract employees with pay. One is to lag the market. That tells you exactly what it says, and they're not paying as well as your competitors. One's to meet the market, and the other one's to exceed the market. You have to know what you're going to do, and you have to understand whatever one you select, that's the kind of employee you're going to get. Here's some do's and don'ts about staffing. Don't you, if you have the authority, hire somebody just because somebody else says so, or you think that's the right thing to do. Don't put somebody in the wrong position. Now, there is a counterbalance to that, and the counterbalance to that is you hire one of 2 ways. You hire for person job fit. That means the person you're hiring fits the job. Or you have a person organization fit. That means the person fits within the organization's culture and values. So if that person actually matches the culture and values of the organization, you should be able to put that person any place. However, you don't want to put them in some place that they don't have the aptitude, training, experience, knowledge, etc. for. The last 2, I think, are very important. Poor language. Pretty important. Very important. Don't promote people just because they've been around for a while. And I always like to add, you don't promote people, pardon me, based on what they've done. You promote them based on demonstrated potential to handle the duties of the next higher position. And then finally, it says down here, don't cheat your employees. And I think that this goes without saying. Now, this is the third piece function of management. That's leadership. This specifically talks about leaders. And notice that leaders are about creating a vision and establishing the corporate values, promoting ethics, which we talked about in chapter 4. The big thing here is, and this is re-emphasizing what we learned in chapter 4, if the leaders don't set the standard and the example, we cannot expect anybody else to follow it. So yes, they have to write the rules, the code of conduct, and then they have to act out, if you will, the code of conduct. Notice the last two down here, embrace change. Now, what does that mean? Well, what it really means is this. If you want something to change, you're the leader, you're in charge, and you want something to change because you know it has to be changed, you have to go about it in a positive manner, and you have to get buy-in from everybody else. If you exhibit one piece of reticence about this change, you can't expect it to be successful. And the easiest way to do this, or at least I think it is to have small wins as you're going along. So in other words, don't try to do this change all at one time. Do it when it's going to make a big difference to people. And so then you go out, you take it bite-sized. And as soon as you do something and it's successful, you celebrate that. Say, hey, look what we've done. Now we can move on to bigger and better things. Finally, and this goes back to the ethical business, stress accountability and responsibility. That's part of ethics, at least as far as I'm concerned. Okay, this is another making ethical decisions, which you can see on page 191. I always suggest that you look at those. It's not something that's required, but gives you an idea of working through the process. This is just accountability again, transparency. People want to know what you're doing and when it should be open and above board, should be no surprises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And notice this is all the stakeholders. Everybody knows what you're doing, and what you've done is clear for everybody to see. Now, the next we're going to talk about are leadership styles. There's a graphic that comes next. You can see that on page 192 at the bottom, figure 7.6. 3 different types of leadership styles. And you get into other courses, some higher level courses, you might be exposed to other type leadership styles, but these 3 are pretty basic and they follow along: autocratic, participative, and free reign. Autocratic is exactly what it says. And it shows a picture of the Duke coach, Mike Krzyzewski. I don't know him. I just know of him and his record. He's been very successful. But I would assume he's like most coaches, even though they're showing people what to do. And we have to think about that. That's what a coach does. You're a coach, I think you probably know that, probably know it better than I do. Even though you're showing people what you want them to do, you don't want them to make mistakes. And so it's probably pretty demonstrative of what you want them to do. And what coaches tend to do, especially in sports, somebody makes a mistake, they take them out of the game. Now, one thing you don't want to do, even when you have to make an autocratic decision, you don't want to criticize them. I just take them out of the game and say, this is what you did. This is what you need to do. You can't do the former, you need to do the latter. Okay. Then next we have is participative. We see this a lot in teams. That's where the manager and the employees, but let's change that around for teams, would be the team leader and the team members working together to make the decisions and then implement them. And finally, free reign is a little different than what we would normally expect this to see. Sometimes this is called laissez-faire. And here, what to do is the manager or the team leader sets the objectives, and he or she says this is what has to be accomplished. And then they let the team members alone to devise ways to do that. Now we see that when we talked about some facet of this in chapter 5 when we talked about Hertzberg, responsibility, accountability, and things of that nature, and a little bit of this in job enrichment, where the manager gave the employee the resources to do the job and told the employee this is what has to be done, and then got out of his or her way and let them take care of it. Okay, this is the slide I talked about, and the amount of employee freedom it goes up as we move away from autocratic into laissez-faire. This talks about natural-born leaders, 4 types of executives: rationalists, humanists, politicists, and culturists. Pretty easy to figure out here. A rational person is a person who looks at things and tries to get to the logic of it and implement the things by being rational in his or her decision making. Humanist is somebody who's employee-centered. Politicist is exactly what it says, and culturist is somebody who is staying with the culture as we see it. Empowerment is simply this: it's giving the employee where you can. It can't be done all over the place, but where you can, giving the employee the resources that he or she needs to do to complete the job, give them responsibility and authority to take care of it, and then get out of their way. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you don't come back and say, well, look, I don't want you to do it that way. Let's try to do it this way the next time. Of course, you do that in private. You don't call somebody out and browbeat them and things of that nature. Those kinds of things don't work. One of the reasons we see this empowerment coming around is especially in the customer service area. It's much better to have an employee who is empowered to act on the customer's behalf. Now, that doesn't mean he or she's always going to side with the customer, but act on the customer's behalf instead of saying, I have to ask my supervisor what I can do or transfer it to the supervisor. So let the supervisor or manager do supervisory or managerial duties and let the employee take care of the customer. Chances are the employee is better prepared, better versed, et cetera, to take care of the customer than to pass that off. So that's what empowerment is. Give the employee the tools that he or she needs to do to take action, be accountable and responsible for that action, and get out of the way. We find out that employees, 1, can do that, and 2, they want to do it, and 3, most of the time, we're pretty good at it. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about here is the controlling area. This just talks about working smarter, and it goes along with empowerment, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. Knowledge management, we know what that is. That's just getting the information we need and then making sure that that is available to the people who need it to make decisions. And then making sure that that knowledge, that information that we've gained and gathered is stored in a place that it can be readily accessible. Now, this is figure 7.7 in your text on page 195, and it talks about the 5 steps in the controlling process. At the beginning, when we talked about the 4 functions of management, controlling was the last one we mentioned. That's always the last one mentioned. And it talked about controlling people and or company resources. And I like to think we don't really want to control people. I think we want to channel them is a better way than control, because it gives us a bad connotation when we use that. But we do need to control certain things. And so when you see this at the bottom of page 195, figure 7.7, the steps are making sure that there are clear standards published. So everybody knows what the standards are. Then, and let's talk about this as a production run. So you have the standards, and then you're going to monitor the performance on a production run. Now that can be the performance of the employees, him or herself, but more than likely it's how the product goes through the production run. So then we're going to compare the results of the production run versus the published standards. And we're going to let everybody know what happened. I'm going to come back to this step 3 here in a second. I'll let everybody know what happened. And then step 5 is part of step 3, at least I like to think of it that way. We're going to take corrective action that we need. So in other words, we say that we're making widgets, and the widget has to have a tolerance. Put this over a little bit better so you can see it. Has to have a tolerance of this much, and anything between my left hand, as it was, and my right hand, anything that falls in between these is intolerance, and we can ship that product. If while the product is going through the production run, we find that the tolerance has now come to this, we have a product that is out of sync, out of standard, and we're going to have to do something to fix it. So it may be that something's wrong with the production run. If it's going through an oven, for instance, the oven may be too hot, or it may be too cool, or whatever happens to be. So we're going to have to take some type of corrective action. However, one of the things I want to say is that there should be monitoring steps through every part of this production run. And so that we're taking corrective action as the production run is going along, if it's needed, as opposed to waiting until it gets to the end and now we have a pile of scrap. We've done quality control at the end. We found product that's not within specification, and we're just going to throw it away. Well, that's a loss. That's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources of all kinds. So that monitoring process within control should be continuous. It should not be just at the end. And then, of course, if we find something is wrong, or once we've compared the end result to the published standards, then we have to take whatever corrective action is needed. But I like to say that when we're going through this control process and we're monitoring, this is what I like to call quality assurance. And that's, we're trying to assure quality through every step of the process instead of just getting to the end and doing a quality control inspection, and then something doesn't meet our requirements and specifications, we're throwing it out. That just doesn't work. Here's something you have to think about if you're a micromanager. You have to be careful about that, and we have to make sure we're not doing things that cause people to say, wait a minute, somebody's always watching over my shoulder here. Just a second. I know we've seen that slide. I'm trying to get this down far enough so we've seen all the rest of them that we need to see them. And I'm not being very successful, but I think we're at the end. This is the way we measure success. We measure success from our customers who are outside the confines of our building, if you will. And then we measure by internal customers. Because in some cases we have to pass a product along to the next person or persons or department that's going to add to that product. So if we send our internal folks, customers, a shoddy product, we're causing problems here. And so we have two customers to worry about, those within our organization and those without that we're trying to sell a product to. And that brings us to the at 5:25. That brings us to the end of chapter 7. Do you have any questions?
I have a comment. When we were talking about the controlling, making sure that it works,
Yes.
I thought I thought about the brewery that we watched on the videotape. Basically, that's what they said, if I'm correct. Is that right? Because they had a process, and they went back once they started bringing in more people and trying to make sure that that quality assurance was working.
Yeah.
Okay. When you were talking about that, I thought I like the word better, like you said, the quality assure, making sure that quality is there, assuring as opposed to controlling.
Well, yeah, we want to make sure we're assuring quality throughout the entire process. And so it's in some cases where we find that we're not being able to do that, let's talk about a production run. We might have to stop the production run and say, no, we need to start this whole process over because we're not in tolerance. We're out of tolerance. If we stop it here and fix what we need to fix, then we can continue the production run. If we don't stop, if we don't stop it here, it goes all the way through, then we're going to wind up with scrap. And we can't do anything with scrap for the most part. So we have to make sure we're doing that right along. Yeah, there has to be some, in some cases, monitoring or controlling of employees. There shouldn't be, assuming the employee is experienced enough. I'm staying away from trained. That's when you use the word experienced. Assuming the employee or employees are experienced enough to handle their tasks. If they're not, we have to stop that and do the requisite training because we've not done that at the beginning. Does that answer?
Okay.
Does that answer your comment or help you a little bit?
Oh, yes, yes, that was great. Thank
Okay,
you.
fine. Well, we're at 5:27. Let's take a break till 5:32.
Okay. See you in a minute. Okay.
Oh.
When you are.
Okay, well, we can start. Chapter 8 is structuring organizations for today's challenges. And we can think of this a little bit like organizing, and perhaps we really should think of it as organizing. So let's look at the learning objectives, learning goals for this chapter. We're going to outline the basic principles of organization management, talk about two thinkers from the 19th century. Compare the organizational theories of Fayol and Weber. By the way, you'll notice that's spelled W-E-B-E-R, but Germans don't pronounce W's, and so it's Weber, not Weber, as we would normally have it. And those are the two I was talking about before. Evaluate the choices managers make in structuring organizations. Contrast the various organizational models. Identify the benefits of inter-firm cooperation and coordination, and finally explain how organizational culture can help businesses adapt to change. Now, this is the woman I was speaking about before, Ursula Burns, and she's profiled at the beginning of chapter 8. I think it's a very nice profile, and she's certainly an interesting person. I suggest that you read that because I think it's a really great thing that Xerox did, not because they brought one woman in after another woman, but they recognized that she was the best person for the job. And I think that's what we have to think about here. We know that reorganization is always around, and it's probably never, ever going to go away. We hear about it more today, I think, than we used to, for a number of reasons. It's done as a way to eliminate supposed fat according to organizations. It's done as a way to become more efficient and effective and things of that nature. And of course, it's taken on some bad names. It's been called downsizing and right sizing and a few other type things. But a lot of companies go through this, and they go through it because they have to. They find that, pardon me, they added resources, and now those resources are no longer needed. Or they added resources and the market has changed. And so they have to change that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't paying attention. Most of us are not clairvoyant. And that's what, your plans do. They try to look as far as 5 or 10 years down the road, but that's not a pure crystal ball. It's kind of most of the time fuzzy. So a lot of times when organizations reorganize, they go back to their basics. They go back to their roots, if you will, and try to go back in many cases to what this last bullet says, their guiding principles, and try to find firmer foundation. Structuring an organization, we want to do things as creating a division of labor, who is going to do what departments are responsible for certain things. Make sure we allocate resources properly. Now, let's take a step back here and remember that every organization has a scarce amount of resources. What that simply means is no organization ever has all the resources at once. And so it must wisely and carefully allocate the resources that it has where to the departments or divisions, if that's a better word, where it's going to get its largest payback. And we also know that there is always competition for these resources. So the organization must do this as objectively as possible. Tasks have to be assigned and people have to be held accountable for their tasks and the successful completion thereof. And then we have to have rules, policies, procedures, and standards. This is a making ethical decisions scenario, which you can find on page 205. I'm not going to spend any more time on that. So why do we change? Well, In many cases, we change because we're forced to change. Competition has changed. Maybe more competition here in the United States, maybe increased competition from outside the United States. We may find that the economy, or at least the economy that we're in, doesn't necessarily need the product we make. We have to do something different. The overall economy could be declining, and that is going to be problematic not just for a specific company, but for many companies. We have to be nimble, I'm using that word, and adapt successfully to changing technology. Many people are stuck in their old ways of doing things. I always like to say it, I'm not savvy when it comes to social media. I don't need to use social media, but if I were some years younger, I would need to use social media. And a lot of my compatriots use social media. I'm just not very good at it. But companies have to be able to use that, and they have to be able to use it, pardon me, to their benefit. Another one is in here. We've talked about this 3 or 4 times in the last hour. That's being responsible for the environment. I only have one. We're not going to get into them. And we have a lot of issues that we're faced with the environment. We have a lot of people that say, well, this stuff's a bunch of hogwash. There's no scientific basis behind it. The problem with that, I'm digressing here just a second. The problem with it is when we talk about climate change, most of us don't see that. We see the day-to-day weather. We see, and experience it, of course. Now we see the seasonal weather change. And again, we experience that. But we don't look at the long term. We don't see that long term because that long term doesn't affect us. But it's there. It's last year was, I've forgotten whether it was the warmest on record or second warmest on record. And we can't deny that there's been changes in the last 15 years. Now, what the answer to that is, I don't know. Some of it is caused by man. How much of it's cyclical, I don't know. What I can say to you is, and then I'll get off my soapbox here. What I can say to you is that we do have climate change. We can't be like an ostrich and stick our head in the sand. We have to figure out what we're going to do. And it's better if we figure out what we're going to do in this country and try to do what we can and not worry about what everybody else has done. That's what we fussed about. Well, developing countries are getting away with this and China's getting away with that. So on and so forth. Now, we ought to pay attention to what we can do and do what we can. And yes, we should get the others on the same boat, but that doesn't mean we should be inactive just because we don't like what they're doing. And then last thing I think that we need to pay attention to about change is the customers' expectations have changed. Now, we'll speak really strongly about this when we get to the marketing chapters in a couple of weeks about the change. But the mantra today is, and I'm stealing a little bit of thunder for a couple of weeks, but it's okay. The mantra today is not to meet the customer's expectations, but to exceed them. And if we exceed customers' expectations, that means we're making quality products. And if the customers aren't going somewhere else because if it's a cheaper price or better service or something else, if you make a quality product and it's superior to your competition, people are going to pay for it because that's what they want. Now, yeah, there's a segment that aren't going to pay for that, but you're never going to get those people anyway. So you can't worry about them. What you have to worry about is exceeding the expectations of your customers, and then hopefully you'll get other people to come in. No, the ones that won't. Don't worry about them because you're never going to get those people. This just talks about, this is what I like to call a gee whiz slide, how much change there's been. And I think the one I like to point out, the best, or I should say is my favorite, is there's two of them. A number of daily newspapers. 15 years ago, there were almost 1,500. Today, there's 1,300. And the number of letters mailed 15 years ago was 207 billion. It's now down to 175 billion. This is from 2010, and it's declining. So production has changed. We've gone away from a lot of mass production, although we still have it, to being more complex in the way we produce things. And we're after the economies of scale that reduce our production costs, reduce our use of raw material, and things of that nature to make us a better product, to make us more efficient, more profitable, things of that nature. Notice that the average cost, I want to read this because it's important to let this sink in. I don't want to paraphrase this. The average cost of goods decreases as the production level rises. So if we can be more efficient in our production and decrease the cost of our production, still sell at the same price. By the way, that's not gouging. Don't think of it that way. But we're going to be more profitable. Now, this articulates the principles of Henry Fayol, his principles of organizations. Fayol was a Frenchman, and notice that he was an economic theoretician, and he published this book he called Administration Industriale Generale in 1919. It didn't become popular in the United States until the late 1940s. Now, I'm not going to go through each of his principles, but there are a couple I want to highlight. One is unity of command. That simply means that there is one person in charge, not several. There are some companies that have dual CEOs. I'm not sure how well that works, but I suppose if they are given responsibility over separate and distinct functions within the corporation, it can work. There has to be a division of labor. That simply means that there are rules and procedures laid out for who is to do what. Now, we can break that down by department or division or office, and then obviously it filters down to employees. But there has to be some division. We have to talk about that. Notice one of his last ones here is equity. That simply means treating people fairly. And what we know is, and we don't talk about it too much here, but we have the theory of equity, or the equity theory, I should say. I think we did touch on it a little bit in chapter 6, no, in chapter 5, when we talked about Hertzberg and a few of those folks. And what we find is, and, I have to say something. I may be getting ahead of myself here or behind myself, and I need to stop just for a second. We're going to talk about Hertzberg and Adams' equity theory in chapter 10. I apologize for that. I've mixed up between this textbook and another one for a different course. That's my fault. Apologize. But equity just means treating people fairly. And we'll get to the theory of equity or equity theory in chapter 10, which will be next week. And I'll spend a little bit more time on it. And then the last he talks about here is esprit de corps. And you want people to have good morale, or you want to foster good morale in the company. So employees will not only think that they're valued, but they'll also be rewarded in some fashion, some manner for good performance or going above and beyond. And that creates a good feeling within the company, both by the employee, from the employee, and it permeates throughout the organization. Well, sometime around Fayol's principles coming out and becoming popular in the United States, those of Max Weber became popular in the United States. He published a book called The Theory of Social and Economic Organizations. And again, it's like Fayol's book. It became popular here in the late 1940s. I think Weber published maybe a little bit earlier than Fayol, but there are a lot of similarities between these folks. Now, what Weber was really talking about here, at least to my estimation, is standardization. He talked about job descriptions. He talked about written rules. He talked about consistent policies, regulations, etc. Now, what he simply meant by that is that they're not changing. Now, it doesn't mean to say they don't have to change, but that they're not changing because somebody thinks, well, it's time to change something. They're changing. If they're changing for good and cogent reasons. Notice his last one. It's one I like. Staffing and promotion is based upon qualifications and merit. It's not based upon how you part your hair, the type of tie you wear, business suits you wear, people you know, etc. Now, we know those things happen, but they're not supposed to happen. And one of the things that Weber was really into was that he talked about a bureaucracy. And we Americans don't like that term. We think of bureaucracy as being with the federal government and other governments, and there's a lot of red tape and things of that nature. Well, governments are not as efficient as a business is. Every time we try to make a government organization efficient like a business, something falls through the crack. I'm not a person who believes that businesses should be run as efficiently. Government agencies should be run as efficiently as businesses. I think they should be run as best as they possibly can be. I don't think they should put up with a lot of waste and things of that nature. But they're not in the business to make money. They're not supposed to make money. And the only organization that we have in the United States that helps us gain money is the IRS. And the problem with the IRS is that most people do not like them. And the Congress likes them so little that it has cut their staff. What's the outcome of cutting the staff? Well, the outcome of cutting the staff may be, chances are, tax refund, if you have one coming, is going to be delayed because they don't have enough people to process the returns. It also means that people won't be audited as much. Now, a lot of people say, oh, that's great. Well, the vast majority of us don't have to worry about being audited. But there are a number of people that need to be audited. And that number is going to decrease because the staffing's been cut, simply because some people in Congress don't like the IRS. The only organization that is designed to help bring money into the coffers of the United States government. Well, I know that sounds like I'm on a soapbox and need to get off of it. I mean, we need to stop and think about what we're going to be shooting ourselves in the foot and possibly punishing people that don't need to be punished. So when we look at Weber and Fayol, managers control workers, well, that's true to some extent, but we don't need to think of the control as having something, grabbing somebody by the nape of his or her neck and saying, this is what you have to do. There has to be a control system of some kind. It does not have to be onerous. It does not have to be a gotcha type thing. It needs to be something that we have rules and regulations in place to have people act and perform in certain ways. So these are some of the things that Fayol and Weber talked about. We show a typical organization chart, which we're going to show next year on figure 8.1 on page 209 in the text. And it's just showing you line of authority. And I think it's fairly easy to look at it. You look at 209, it shows you the president, and then underneath the president, there are three people report to him: a production manager, a manager of marketing, and then a manager of finance. And then there are supervisors underneath each one of these people, and eventually there are workers underneath them. So that's, this is what this is talking about. Now, a bureaucracy, as the text points out, talks about an organization that has many layers of supervision, if you will, or managers. And yeah, there's some problems with that. And I think that we find that there are ways to work that. Actually, the most bureaucratic organization in the United States that I can think of now, it may not be as true today as it was not the federal government, was General Motors. And the old story goes is that it was virtually, General Motors at one time had 5 divisions. It was virtually impossible for the chief executive officer of General Motors to pass out something and it got articulated to each of the divisions in the way it should have been articulated. It caused a lot of fiefdoms and protect our turf type things, like would be the Buick division against the Chevrolet division, et cetera. And it caused them a lot of problems. And so what a bureaucracy simply says is you have published rules, regulations, and procedures, and they should be followed. It talks about promotion on merit and things of that nature, hiring employees that have the expertise that you want. Well, all of that's pretty good. I think most of us would sign up for that. Perfect. It's when you get the layers in there and you don't empower employees to act on their own recognizance. I think the federal government's gotten away from that to some extent, but it's probably going to be there for a while. It's very endemic. It's embedded that those things are hard to embrace. But we have to remember something. Almost any organization has a hierarchy, and almost any organization is going to have some level of bureaucracy. What organizations have to do is to remove that barrier that more or less says, probably doesn't, but more or less says, at least in somebody's thinking, you can't do something unless you get your supervisor's okay. And the problem with that is, well, what happens if the supervisor's not here today and there's nobody that takes his or her place? What do? I just throw up my hands and wait till tomorrow, I guess. So we need to get away from that that type thinking. But there's nothing inherently wrong with the bureaucracy unless it hamstrings employees' ability to act. And of course, that's what happens in some cases, and that's why people get aggravated. And this gives us a little bit more about bureaucracies. And I think the last thing is probably the best thing, and that is bureaucracies can aggravate customers. There's just no question about it. If somebody has to continually say, I have to ask my supervisor, I don't know, I have to pass you here or there or someplace else, it's aggravating. Think about calling an organization and they're getting their help desk, and the help desk is outside the United States. And you're speaking to someone from India or the Philippines. Now, I choose those 2 countries because both of those countries have a high population of English speakers. Now, they don't speak American English, we know that. At least people in India don't. They speak what I call English, or British English may be better. And the people in the Philippines may speak more American English, but it's still not the same. And think of how aggravated you get when you're trying to get your point across and they can't answer you. Well, that's what happens with bureaucracies. And that's the issue that they're just trying to bring up here. All right. Here's the question. Do we want centralized authority, which means everything goes up and everything comes down? And actually comes down is a better way to say that. But if you want a decision made, you have to send the decision up before it's made, and it comes down this way. Or do you want a decentralized organization? Now, the object of decentralized organization is empowerment. Employees are given the latitude to make their own decisions because they happen to be, for the most part, more familiar with the customers than folks upstairs are. So there's a yin and yang here. You probably want, and the best organization probably has a combination of both. And you want the decentralization, which is this empowerment of employees to act, but you may want certain decisions to be made at the top. Span of control simply speaks to the number of employees that directly report to a manager or a supervisor. When I was in the Army, we used to use 10. We thought that was the best number. And we broke that down to squads. Squads normally had 10 people. That doesn't mean to say it's that way. And of course, with today, the advent of the PC and other types of being able to communicate broadly, that span of control has, in many cases, gotten larger. So a manager may be responsible for more people than 10. Organization is going to have to try to work that out for itself. There is, as far as I'm concerned, there is no magic number. And you just have to determine what works best for your organization. So broad span may be good, narrow span may be good. Sometimes you may have a combination of them where you have a broad span most of the time, but then when you have people working on a project, you may want to narrow that span to where however many people on the team are directly reporting either to the team leader or to a manager. We have the difference here between the tall organization and the flat organization. That really goes back pretty much to centralized or decentralized. Tall would be, the chart would be tall because of various levels of management, and broad would be, or flat would be, just as it is. You don't have that many levels of management. So like I say, it goes back to pretty much mirrors centralized or decentralized. This is a depiction of a flat organization. You can see this at figure 8.3 at the bottom of page 211 in the text. Just shows an owner manager here and the number of people underneath him or her. And notice here, there's nobody in between. It's just direct owner manager to employee. And that gives you just a simplified picture of an organization. Now, by the way, you can look at page 211 and see some advantages and disadvantages of centralized authority versus decentralized. And I'm not going to go over those with you because I think they're pretty self-explanatory. You can kind of use your own judgment when you see these things. If you have some particular thing you're not sure of, ask me a question, send me an email or something like that, and I'll explain it to you. But we don't really need to spend a lot of time on it. Now we're going to go into various types of organization structure. And the first one we're going to talk about is departmentalization. By the way, if you type that out, I think it gives you a red squiggly line, says it's not a word, but that's okay. What it does here is divides the organization into work units, if you will. And the employees are grouped by skill or expertise, and they're in those areas based upon one of those two ways of thinking. Thinking's okay. Now here's some advantages of them. You have commonality of skills, and people can move up the department ladder, if you will, as they become more conversant with the skills. Because you have people with commonalities, economies of scale will come into play, and also because you have the common skill, work functions can be passed around to various and sundry people because everybody is an expert, at least at a certain level. With any advantages, there have to be disadvantages. There may not be good communications between various departments. Employees may identify with their department and their work peers as opposed to the company. They'll say, "Oh well, I'm in finance," but they don't articulate what the company is. And because of that, they can become more insular. That is, they don't go beyond their comfort zone. They stay within themselves. Change will be very difficult here. And the last one, and we don't talk about that in this course, is that because they're alike in some fashion, skill, knowledge, expertise, whatever, within this common group, if you will, they may engage in what is known as groupthink. And the biggest problem with groupthink, and I'm not going into this whole business, the biggest problem with groupthink is the aura of invincibility and the aura of we're right and everybody else is wrong. So they're not open to different ideas. These are ways to departmentalize. This is a chart that can be seen on page 214, figure 8.5. And then there's some other ways to departmentalize. They're showing marketing, they're showing production, and a few other type things there on that chart. Now, there's other ways to structure an organization: line organizations, line and staff, matrix style, and cross-functional. Line organization is pretty simple. Two-way communication, and it goes, as it says here, from top to bottom on every particular thing. Every person reports to one supervisor. Notice no specialists. And line managers give the orders and they make sure the employees do what's supposed to do, and they would met out any type of discipline that was required. Line workers are directly responsible for production. Now, for service companies, still the same thing, producing whatever the service company produces. And notice they're the doers. And also, they have the responsibility to make decisions. Now, of course, that would come to not all persons within a line organization, just certain ones. Staff people are those folks who are assigned to assist the line people by providing expertise. Could be human resources, could be engineering, could be finance, could be a number of other type things. They do not, staff personnel do not have the authority to tell line personnel, this is what you have to do. In other words, they can show the line person what needs to be done, but if the line person persists in doing what he or she wants to do, they can't tell them otherwise. Now, they can go to the supervisor and tell the supervisor, but they can't tell the line person what to do. And that's where we get in some of these little dicey situations, because they're asking the people with the expertise to come down and show them what to do, and then they say, well, I'm not going to do it that way. Now, maybe that's a little simplistic, but that does happen. Figure 8.6 on page 216 gives you an idea of a line and staff. And the staff people, you'll notice, are off to the side: human resources, legal, etc. They do not have direct authority over any of the line workers. A matrix organization is a very peculiar animal. This is where you get people with expertise from various parts of the organization to work together on a project, usually a temporary project. Now, temporary doesn't always have a set time like a week or 2 weeks. Sometimes it can extend longer than that. But they come together to work temporarily on a project because they bring these different skills together and can hopefully produce a better product. One of the problems here is that this person is still assigned across the hall. And now this person in the matrix organization is working for someone else. But he still or she still has to report back to the home office, if you will, because that's actually the outfit that's paying my salary. When I'm working on this project, they're not paying my salary. The folks back here are still paying my salary. This gives you a matrix organization here on page 217, figure 8.7, 8.7. And obviously what it does here, we're going to get some advantages. There's flexibility in assignments. You get more cooperation because you get more people from different parts of the organization working together for a common goal. It helps stimulate creativity. And because we're using all of the organization's resources, hopefully, or most of them, we should be more efficient in what we're able to do. But of course, it has problems. It's complex, as we mentioned before, and it's costly. If you have an employee who's working on a project, pardon me, but he or she still belongs across the hall, as I mentioned before, who am I reporting to? No person can serve two masters. You have to have good cooperation or it won't work. If you don't have it, you're going to forget about it. Remember that this is whatever comes out of this is temporary, and it could be a temporary fix for something that actually needs a long-term solution. And of course, if people see that, that's going to really cause them a lot more problems than the fact that they are actually assigned across the hall. They're going to see that what they're doing isn't going to work. And of course, as we said, the teams are permanent, so again, you kind of know this as a problem. Now, you can also have cross-functional self-managed teams. Now, self-managed team, let's step back here for a second. The self-managed team is a team that does everything. It hires, it fires, it sets rewards, it enumerates its tasks and assigns the priority to them, etc. A lot of times managers have problems with this because the manager is taken out of the loop with a self-managing team. He or she doesn't need to be there anymore. Now, sometimes managers become facilitators of these teams. They're resource people for these teams. And then that kind of works a little bit better. Sometimes they even become team leaders. But notice, team leader is not the same as a manager or supervisor. So we can have this, that there is some empowerment here, and it can be a good way to do things. Cross-functional team is exactly what it says. People from different functions to come together, and notice that they often many times made up with people even outside the organization, customers, suppliers, etc. And then you may even have the government involved in this. So in some cases, that can be a good scenario. Now, here's what we need for teams to be successful. They have to know what they're organized to do. And in doing that, they have clear goals and objectives. So it's not something that's, well, we'd like to do this, or we'd like to do that, or might be good to do this, or might be good to do that. No, everything's set there. A good, well-functioning team is a team where each individual member is held mutually accountable. So he or she is not only accountable to complete the tasks to which he or she is assigned, They're mutually accountable for the team goals. It can't say, well, as Samuel Goldwyn would say, include me out. I'm going to take care of my stuff and I'm not going to worry about you. And that doesn't work. The team has to have complementary skills, both in expertise at doing things and complementary skills in communication, good relationships, and things of that nature. And finally, if you have the team set properly, and then with these complementary skills, they're able to take over somebody else's job or jobs or functions when that person is not around for various and sundry reasons. So there's an ability to do some fill-in type work. This talks about real-time business. It talks about networking. I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on networking. We kind of know what that is. And that's just simply using technology to link departments, to link organizations, to make any other kind of linkages that are going to support what needs to be done. Talk about companies no longer being self-sufficient. I'm not so sure how much I agree with that statement, but what it is saying is the companies need to, in many cases, lean on or use the expertise that other companies have, where companies are not sufficient or it's not considered to be a core competency. And of course, real time means exactly what it says, that people are operating in as we are right now, and not waiting for something else. Transparency, we talked about this before, and I really don't know what else I could say. But transparency just means openness. Here it talks about not only being open, but being willing to share some of its competencies with other companies. And sharing that, there's no demarcation of who's what or what's who. Virtual corporation, pretty much what we know. People hooked together by computers for the most part, made up, and it's made up, if you're hooking organizations together, it's made up of firms that join and leave as needed. It's kind of important to say that because we don't always think about that. And this gives a graphic display of a virtual corporation, figure 8.8 in your text at the bottom of page 220. And notice what you have here is a core firm, and then you have a number of other firms that are acting in a way like spokes. So that would be a hub, and then spokes that go there. Benchmarking. This is simply measuring your procedures, etc., with an organization that is considered to be a leader in your field. It says world's best here, and that's probably true, although that may not always be as easy as you might think. So I'm saying somebody's considered a leader in your field. Organizations change, and so somebody who's the best today may not be best tomorrow. That's what I'm saying here, and I just want to make that a little clearer than what it says. Core competencies. These are the functions that a company does well, and they may do them as well or better than their competition. What it also says is that those competencies that you don't do well should be farmed out to someone else. Now, yes, I'm mentioning the dreaded word outsource. And it doesn't always have to be shipped overseas. It doesn't always have to be shipped outside the continental United States. But companies that have competencies, or at least Now, I can't think of what I want to say. Other terms gone right out of my mind. Something that they do on a routine basis, but they're not competent at doing that. Or at least they feel like they don't have the competency to perform that task well. They shouldn't do. They should farm it out. Now, a lot of those competencies don't happen to be in things like what they manufacture, something like that. That could be something in-house things. This is what Nike did. Nike found out that it was very good at marketing and promotion and things of that nature, but that it was not good in manufacturing. And that's why Nike outsourced its manufacturing. Of course, they got in trouble with that when they were found out to have people who were their outsourced partners were using child labor and a few other sweatshops and a few other type things. Well, they did a better job of controlling that, and it cost them some business, but they pretty much have that under hand today. So it's very important to make sure that you know what your core competencies are, that you stick with your core competencies, but that you do not take on things that are not core competencies or try to continue operations which don't fall under your core competencies. These are benefits and concerns of healthcare outsourcing. Obviously, that's an issue because people might feel that they're not getting answers and things of that nature. So you really have to pay attention. But it's stop and think about this. Most companies don't have the time and resources to do a good job of taking care of their employees and their health issues, their health insurance, et cetera. So it's very difficult. This just talks about jobs that are going to be outsourced manufacturing. I kind of wish that they wouldn't put this in here, because what that says is that the United States is outsourcing all this manufacturing. And the fact of the matter is it's not. We're still a world leader in manufacturing, which we'll see in the next chapter. But we have to realize that there's some manufacturing that is what is known as resource intensive. That means a lot of people. And when it's resource intensive, we probably are going to lose that manufacturing. But where we have been really paying attention to technology, et cetera, in manufacturing, the United States has done very well. And I want you to pay particular attention to the ball container video in Chapter 9, because it will kind of buttress what I have just mentioned. Well, here you are, a classic example of adapting to market change. It's not possible to get a typewriter repaired any longer, at least not in the United States. And I found out the hard way some years ago. I had a typewriter that had died on me. And I wasn't saying I didn't have a computer, but I've still used a typewriter for some things. And I took it to, I think, the only repair place in Cincinnati, and had to leave a deposit. And they called me and said, this thing's not repairable. I can't say I lost my deposit, but I certainly didn't get it back. This just talks about keeping in touch with something that Amazon does, and I'm not going to talk about that. Difference between using Twitter, Facebook, etc., and old school communications. Restructuring, well, that's kind of talks about what we've been talking about right away here, but this is talking about an inverted organization. And an inverted organization, the slide which comes up next, you can see it on page 224, and this is placing the CEO and top management on turning the pyramid upside down, and showing it the manager's job. And by the way, the manager's job in many cases was this years ago, but because he had or she had to communicate with people, they didn't get to this being people persons. Support the employees that work for them and ensure that they have the resources they need to do their jobs so they can be successful. If it can't be successful, then obviously there's going to be some problem. I'm trying to get to the bottom last slide here, and I'm having some difficulty doing that. That's where we were before, and that's where we are now. I'm not sure that probably is the last slide. So that brings us to the end of chapter 8. Do you have any questions for me?
No, did you get a new typewriter?
No, did you get a new typewriter?
The typewriter? That's just
yes, did you find your new
Yes, did you find you a new one?
That's a thing of the past. I'll give you a little story. This goes back a couple of years, I think. Are you familiar with what the old IBM Selectric looked like?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Well, there was an IBM Selectric that was back here in one of our corridors in the entrance to the break room. I've used that break room, lunchroom, etc. And that Selectric sat there on that shelf for at least 2 years.
Wow.
It didn't have a
Wow.
sign that said "Welcome to a good home" or anything like that. It sat there. Now it's disappeared. I don't know where it went. But what that just simply shows you is it was put there. Obviously, it was saying if you want to take it, and nobody took it. And I mean, you know, I just stopped to think about it. I borrowed my mother's typewriter, and it had a daisy wheel and a couple of other things in it. And I used it for forms for a while, just, you know, do things like that. You know, but after I learned, and I'm not the best technology person, but after I learned, and you know, how to do things on the computer and print envelopes and stuff like that, I didn't need that typewriter. I may still have it, but I don't know. I haven't any idea where it is. And even if I did know where it was, I wouldn't resurrect it and do anything with it.
That's good.
That's good.
So we're at 6:23. Let's come back at 6:28. We'll get into chapter 9, production and operations management.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Ready when you are.
Ready when you are.
Chapter 9, Production and Operations Management. Learning goals, we're going to describe the current state of U.S. manufacturing, what manufacturers have done to become more competitive. Describe the evolution from production to operations management. Identify various production processes and describe techniques, pardon me, that improve productivity, including computer-aided design and manufacturing, flexible manufacturing, lean manufacturing, and mass customization. Describe operations management, planning issues, including facility location, facility layout, materials requirement planning, purchasing, just-in-time inventory control, and quality control. And then finally, explain the use of PERT and Gantt charts to control manufacturing processes. Notice the first bullet on this slide. The United States is still the world's leading manufacturer. Manufacturing has continued to grow since 1970 and is 2 times larger than it was in 1970. And finally, almost 25% of all goods produced each year come from the United States. Now, of course, that's much different than it used to be. That does not mean to say that the United States has lost capacity to manufacture. Now, yeah, it has fewer manufacturing plants. What it simply means is that the rest of the world has caught up to us. A lot of people cannot accept that fact. We have to stop and think that our population is about 330 million. There are 6 billion people in the world. China has over 1 billion. India has over 1 billion. And the European Union, which comprises Germany and France and Great Britain and a few other organizations, a few other countries, excuse me, have a greater population than the United States when put together. So we have to understand that while we're still doing well, that we're not the lion king of the jungle any longer when it comes to manufacturing and when measured by quantity, which is not going to happen. And I suspect that somewhere down the road, China might eventually outproduce us in manufacturing. Well, you know, if you were a team and you were controlled by your size, in other words, you were a team and you said, well, okay, you can only have 11 people on the field at one time. But this other team, because it's a larger team, comes from a larger population, can have 20 people on the field at the same time. Well, who's going to win? That's pretty obvious, no matter how skilled your players are. And of course, that's what we're trying to do in the country right now, is become more skilled in our manufacturing processes. What happens when we do that, greater expertise in our manufacturing process. What happens when we do that, it means that some people are probably going to get laid off because they don't have the requisite skills to continue. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have in the United States today, is having an educated workforce. People will say, well, we're not educated for, pardon me, we're not educating for businesses. Well, I don't agree with that. If we're putting out graduates who know how to read, write, think conceptually, critically, know basic mathematics, are functionally literate, are better, more than functionally literate, or better in information technology, we're giving the workplace an educated workforce. The workplace is going to tell you and teach you what they specifically want you to do. But they don't want to have to teach writing. They don't want to have to teach reading. They don't want to have to teach critical thinking. They don't want to have to teach logical reasoning and things of that nature. So we have to understand that if the workforce is not as educated as it should be in what it needs to be educated in, then we're going to have a problem. And that's why a lot of folks that used to have pretty good jobs in manufacturing, I'm talking about dollar-wise, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year jobs, are not working now is because they're high school graduates and they don't have the other skills, mental skills that they need to compete in the workplace today. You know, you ask yourself a question. I'll give you this little throwaway comment here. You ask yourself a question, why would anybody want to work in a coal mine? Well, if you work in most of the coal mines in the United States, the economy in those areas is not very good. And if you can go down to the ground and make $80,000 a year, that's what you're probably going to do. I'm not saying I would do it. You'd have to pay me well north of $80,000 a year to go down in some hole in the ground. But that's what I'm talking about here. Work in a coal mine doesn't take a lot of education. I'm not putting those people down. Don't misunderstand me. But some of this manufacturing takes education. People have to know how to do computers. They have to know how to do quality control. They have to do a whole lot of other things. And that's why you hear people complain about our manufacturing. And I would tell you that our manufacturing, besides what the book says, is still in pretty good shape. And some manufacturing, pardon me, is actually coming back to the United States. But when we get to resource-intensive manufacturing, meaning a lot of people, that type of job is probably never going to come back here. Okay, enough of my soapbox. This just gives a slide of what's made in the United States: chemicals, transportation equipment, computers, and electronics. Talks about the top 10 states in exporting. And then the next one talks about massive manufacturers in the United States. And we don't think of them: Chevron, ExxonMobil, Ford Motor Company, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Procter & Gamble. We don't think about some of those companies because we don't think of them as manufacturing. And yet that's what they do. Apple Computers in here. Manufacturing. Now, of course, some of what Apple does, a lot of what some of these do is manufactures outside the United States. A lot of it's manufactured inside the United States. So we have to stop and think about that when we start complaining. And of course, this slide just talks about sustainability. We know that we consumers, customers if you prefer, are telling our manufacturers and other business entities, we want you to be sustainable. We want you to be wise stewards of environmental resources. We've only got one. I know you've heard me say it before. I can't stop it. We only have one environment. We need to do the best we can to save it. This is just a slide talks about the top paying service jobs in the United States. I'm not going to dwell on that. Remaining competitive in a global environment. Here's some keys here. And one of the keys, a couple of the keys are focusing on customers. Again, going back to what I mentioned before, exceeding customers' expectations. Having close relationships with suppliers. Now, this is something, unfortunately, that we had to learn from the Japanese. And we should have known that at the very beginning. And I'm not going to get into that. Something we shouldn't do. Practicing continuous improvement. Again, something we learned from the Japanese. Now, as a matter of fact, you say to yourself, well, how did the Japanese learn it? Well, they learned that from an American, Dr. W. Edwards Deming, who taught them about quality assurance, quality control, and things of that nature, and continuous improvement. That was his big mantra. And then a couple of other things we're going to talk about a little bit later: saving on site selection. In other words, siting our location where it's close to suppliers and close to customers and things of that nature. And then finally, adapting new production techniques, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And of course, there's some other ones on here. Those stand out to me. I'm not denigrating the rest of them. Those are just ones that I like to pick up on. If I didn't say focus on quality, I should have, because that's just something that there is no substitute for. And and we all know that. We want quality products. Of course, the problem with the American is if he wants a quality or she wants a quality product at the cheapest possible price, and that's okay as long as the cheapest possible price is not sacrificing quality. Too often that's what happens. Now, one of the things that we need to think about, pardon me, is what Germany did, and that's on this slide here. Germany put a lot more money into research and development, and we're still reluctant to do that in this country. I don't know why, but we don't spend, companies don't spend a sizable portion of their budget on training and development and research, and they should, because we're only, any company is only as good as its employees, and employees don't have the requisite skills and don't keep up with the requisite skills, and companies don't do the proper amount of research. They really have a lot of problems, or they're going to have a lot of problems. Now, production management is a thing of the past. It used the 5 factors of production, and it helped people create goods, but it wasn't as far thinking as it should have been. I'm not saying that those people who did that should have done something else. They probably didn't know as much as they did. Where we have now morphed from production, which was the operative word was production. We want to produce as much as we possibly can, to operations management, which looks at converting or transforming inputs into outputs, goods and services. So it encompasses a number of things that production management never encompassed. It talks about inventory control, quality control. Now remember, I like to use the term quality assurance because quality control to me is still the old term of having inspectors at the end of the production line and throwing away anything that was outside of specification. We didn't control quality. We just threw stuff away and made scrap. So I like to think of one of two things: either quality assurance or quality control, which means we're controlling quality through the entire production run. Production scheduling. So we're not just doing, building things up just to be building them up. And then finally, follow-up. Now that's all part of operations management. Now I realize that I read each of those to you, which I normally don't do, but I think it's important that we internalize that into what we want to do. The production process, by the way, there's a graphic that you can see in the text, figure 9.1 at the bottom of page 239. And we also have operations management in the service sector. And we think about that. This profiles the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. And notice what its operations include. Things like fine dining and training for employees and things of that nature. I had a very interesting case study on the Ritz-Carlton that I use a course I used to teach up. And unfortunately, it's not part of this textbook, but it'd be very good for people to see what the Ritz-Carlton does. This is just talking about top productivity applications for the iPad. I'm not going to go into that. It's one of those, I like to call them gee whiz slides. This was the production process that I mentioned before. The inputs on the left-hand side, the production itself in the middle, and then what we have, the outputs, goods and services. It also mentions ideas there as well. Farm utility. This is something we do in operations management. Notice it talks about value that is added to the materials and the creation of finished goods and services. So it's a value-added process, farm utility. Now, this is Andrew Grove. Andrew Grove was, if not the founder, one of the founders, and was a longtime CEO of Intel Corporation. Andrew Grove had an interesting standing within the company. It's a little bit of digression here, but I think it's an interesting story. I always like to mention it. Andrew Grove had an interesting standing with his company because he held a PhD. And I think his PhD was in chemistry, but don't hold me to that. So he could walk in the research and development lab at Intel and carry on a conversation with these folks and not be overwhelmed by what the technology folks were doing. But notice what he says here. These are his production requirements. Build and deliver what customers want when they want it. Now, he mentions here an acceptable level of quality. I like to use this exceeding expectations. And finally, to do it at the least possible price possible. Now, notice nowhere in this thing has he sacrificed quality. As a matter of fact, he talks about acceptable level of quality. I just changed that. So I think it should be exceeding expectations. So what we have to think about here is we often think of lower priced something as being quality deficient. And while that is normally true, or doesn't have the same quality as something that's a little more expensive, assuming that the products are equal. And while that's normally true, doesn't mean it always has to be true. But we do know if we shop in certain stores and pay less money, because that's what the store promotes, we're most likely going to get a product that is not as high a quality as if we went down the street and paid for the same piece of merchandise at a different, well, not the same piece, a similar piece of merchandise at a different store. Now, there are a couple of types of processes and assembly and production. One's process manufacturing, and the other is assembly process. Process manufacturing is that part which takes raw materials and physically, in some manner, changes the material. Whereas assembly is the production part that puts the things together. So you can look at it as putting the pieces of the puzzle together, if you will. Here are some key production processes: continuous and intermittent. Continuous really talks about long production runs. And continuous just means exactly what it says. It continues to do what you want it to do. Where intermittent are short runs, and this allows the producer, if you will, the manufacturer, to alter the run so he or she can make different products. So machines are the same for the most part, but he or she, Mr. or Miss producer, manufacturer, can alter the machines to produce a different product. Now, these are products made by minutes. This is the Gee Whiz slide. I'm really not going to talk about that because several of those products are on there. I don't eat, so I'm going to stay away from that. Now, this is what helps make companies more competitive: computer-aided manufacturing, flexible manufacturing, lean manufacturing, and then mass customization. And we'll expand on each of these as we go along. We have computer-aided design and a computer-aided manufacturing. Computer-aided design is exactly what it says. You design a product using a computer to help you design the product. Computer-aided manufacturing is exactly what it says. You use the computer to assist in the manufacturing process. Computer integrated manufacturing, that is uniting the computer itself with computer-aided design with computer-aided manufacturing. So you're taking two distinct pieces of operation, if you will, the design part and the manufacturing part, and you're putting them together. Notice it says that this procedure, if you will, for lack of a better term, is expensive, but that it cuts 80% of the manufacturing time. And you know, if you stop and think about it, if you cut 80% of the time that's required or that was required, you're probably going to come out ahead. Now, what that also should mean to you, or you should think about, is that you probably can't do that one time and make money. You probably need to do it over a time period. I can't give you what that time period would be, but you couldn't do it just one time and say, okay, well, I've saved money, because you probably won't. But if you do it time after time after time after time, more often you do it, then that cost is going to be reduced, and the saving that you're getting is going to increase. Actually, saving that you're, how do I want to say that? Saving that you're enjoying, I think, is a better way to say that. Flexible manufacturing is simple. You're designing machines to be able to perform more than one task. Allen Bradley uses this. Notice here, 26 machines and robots build, test, and package parts. Now, Allen Bradley also has a very good employment record. So while some of this has likely replaced humans, they still have a fairly good size workforce, or they did. The thing to remember about lean manufacturing is you use less of everything that goes into the manufacturing process. So you're using fewer humans, employees, using less raw material, using less engineering effort, using less space, and having less inventory. Now, there's a reason for having less inventory before we get to any other operational aspect. If you have inventory on your shelf, it's costing you 8% of your overhead. Because you have to store it, you have to have people to store it, you have to have people to bring it in, put it on the shelves. You have to, you're paying for heating, you're paying for air conditioning, depending upon what that happens to be, lighting, whatever else. You may have special storage units you have to put things in, which cost you more, which would be most likely refrigeration. So the thing we want to talk about in lean manufacturing is using less of everything. I had a student here a few years ago who worked for Sara Lee, and that's what he did. He went around and taught their manufacturing plants how to adapt to and adopt lean manufacturing. Mass customization, tailoring product to meet your customers, but you're producing large numbers. Actually, I said that incorrectly. For a large number of customers, not the same customers, different customers. So you're making a run, and it'll go to many different people. And notice it says more and more the manufacturers are learning to customize, and we also find that in the service sector as well. This talks about mass customization of candy. Notice what they do here. This outfit lets customers customize their chocolate bars. It's a very interesting thing to think about. Operations management. We've been talking around the periphery. Now we're going to get to the guts of this thing. It talks about, notice here, I think we introduced some of this before. We talk about more detail now. where we're going to locate, how we're going to lay out, how we're going to purchase, how we're going to take care of inventory, and how we're going to implement quality control. Here we are, facility location. And again, what's the right word I want to use here? I'm going to say caution. I don't want to say that. I want to alert you to this thing about facility location that really is important to a bulk container, and it really comes out in that video. You're going to like that. I think all these videos are interesting, but I've known bulk container for years. Always thought of them about makers of mason jars. And then what they're doing today is just is so much different than the concept that I had in my mind about what they do today. Anyway, this is critical because you want to have a facility that is both close to your customers and close to your suppliers. Cuts down on transportation costs. Helps in a lot of ways. And of course, in business, especially if you're retail business. Now, this is not talking necessarily about retail business, especially about retail business. Everything is about location, location, location. You have to be someplace that has high foot traffic. Stay or leave is, again, it's an ethical decision making scenario. I always recommend that you look at these things, not something that you have to do. You'll find this at the top of page 246. Yeah, we can do operations management on the internet as well. And we have to think about these things and practice pretty much the same as what we've done before. Notice that businesses outsource engineering and certain things of that nature. And then future location, a facility location. We know that information technology has allowed people to do things that they never thought of before. So we find more people telecommuting than ever before, and that's something that's probably going to grow and not going to go away. Facility layout is very, very important, and there are a number of ways you can do that. Facility layout really simply means locating resources to be used in the manufacturing process where they're going to be most accessible to the workers. And it just depends on what you're doing as how you want to lay this out. And we're going to give you several different ways to lay out here. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's a couple of, yes, there's a slide that we're going to get to here in a second. And it graphically displays the different types of layout. You find them on page 248. That's the whole page, figure 9.2, typical layouts. Assembly layout is where workers only do a few tasks at a time. Remember, assembly line is something that you start with something that you want to build maybe with the frame, and then you move it down the line, and various and sundry people put their product that they're responsible for into the frame. Modular layout is where employees perform more than one task. A fixed position layout, workers congregate around what's going to be done, and then the process layout is similar equipment and functions are grouped together. And as I say, you can see these on page 248. The assembly line layout doesn't really show up real well here, but you see the assembly line, how it goes up, so you can find out with a finished truck. Then we have the modular layout. Yeah, even the modular layout is different than the process layout in your book. They show one ahead of the other. And so all the different things that need to be gone here in assembly tables and where the different implements that the people need are stored, if you will. Process layout done by processing. itself, and then the fixed position layout. Now the object here is, with the fixed position layout, you have the house that's built, the frame is built, and now you have the different people who need to be in there. Carpentry, roof, masonry, plumbing contractor. They can all be working at the same time, and it's just set up in that fashion so it can be easily accessed, and nobody is precluded from working. A materials requirement planning, it's a computer-based system, same way as enterprise resource planning, which is a newer version of that, combines the uses of the computer, and it really helps doing things in the manufacturing process. Now, this is something, of course, that is really important to any business, and that is purchasing. Purchasing has changed, I believe, in the years that I've been associated with, from buying product in quantity, and normally that was done to save cost. Usually the more you bought, the price was reduced, to not only buying in quantity, but to finding the right product at the right quality level. And so what you have here is finding someone as a supplier that you want to start a relationship with. Now, what do I mean by that? We're going to get to this a little bit more in just-in-time inventory. But if you have a good relationship with your supplier, and that supplier is providing you not only quantity needed, but the quality wanted, quality demanded, and you have a good relationship with them, you're probably, or you should be able to get first priority in ordering. And so it's very important to do this. Not only do you want to find quality, you want to find a supplier who is going to give you the best product and service. And then obviously you want to negotiate, the best price possible. Now, this is inventory control, and that really talks about controlling inventory. And this is known as just-in-time inventory. And this is a critical thing about having a good relationship with your supplier. So you have a good relationship with a supplier, and you have a contract with a supplier that says, Mr. or Miss Supplier, you will provide me the product I need in the quantity needed at the time I need it. So we're not going to get any material that we need for production until right before we're ready to produce. Now, right before, maybe we're talking a day or 2 days or something like that. But you don't want to have to store inventory. And because, like I said before, it's costly, and for a whole manner of reasons. So a whole manner of reasons. But here you've got a good relationship with your supplier, and he or she is not going to send you product until you need it. So it doesn't have to sit on your shelf. That's what we call just-in-time inventory. You'll see it abbreviated here as JIT. And so obviously you can't do that if you don't have a good relationship with your supplier. Then we talk about quality control. And what this is, pretty much what this is here, and it doesn't really say it as well as we should, but this is using statistical methods. Six Sigma is one, which I'll get to in a second. Statistical methods to help you control quality. You'll notice them in there. There's statistical quality control, and there's a couple of other ones. I'm not as knowledgeable on these things as I would like to be, because I'm not good in statistics. But what I can tell you is it's using statistics to help with the quality control. And what this really talks about here is reducing errors. And the Six Sigma, which is used widely by companies, General Electric being one of them, only allows for 3.4 defects for per million opportunities. And I've done the calculation before. It comes out to 99.7777% or something like that. Very high. And obviously, all companies want to reduce defect, because more defects you have, it gets into your operations, it gets into everything. It causes you problems with customers, may cause you problems with suppliers, etc. So that's what they're using at the Six Sigma's one, statistical process. The statistical quality control is another. Dr. Deming, who I spoke about before, had his 14 points to improve quality, which are not mentioned in his text, and we're not going to go over them. But he was very, very adamant about reducing defects, reducing errors, and then using statistical methods to help ensure quality. These are just a few of the other things I mentioned: the statistical quality control and statistical process control. Again, using statistical samples to ensure quality. And of course, that's a good way to do some things, because that way you're not having to sample everything that goes through the production line. That would be time consuming and very costly to do that. Now, of course, you have to ensure that the processes you are doing and how you're running your processes, everything is within tolerance. And so that's why you have to monitor this quality throughout. It's not only the quality of the product, but it's the quality of the operation. And so that's important. And if everything is within tolerance, as I mentioned, then you can do statistical samples and be relatively assured that everything is going to be as you want it to be. This is the Baldrige Award. It was set up for mostly for manufacturers, named after Malcolm Baldrige, who was Secretary of Commerce many years ago in the United States. And it talks about how companies can do things to compete for the Baldrige Award. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the focus of the Baldrige Awards is on quality. And so it's very important that people understand that quality piece. And then here's the winners from 2010. And notice they crossed the board. There's a hospital in there, Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland, and then some manufacturing companies as well. And then one of the ways that people do this is the ISO, International Organization for Standardization, ISO 9000 and 14000. Quality management in 9000, and assurance standards, and then best practices for management at the 14,000 level. And the last piece that we have, and I don't think I can get this slide up here. I'm going to try. Yeah, here we go. Here's the PERT chart. PERT chart and Gantt chart. You can see a PERT chart on in figure 9.3 at the bottom of page 252, and a Gantt chart at the top of page 253, figure 9.4. A PERT chart is simply a chart that's used to analyze the tasks involved in completing a given project, and then determining the amount of time needed to complete those tasks. And then that's the PERT chart. The Gantt chart is very similar. That's the slide I don't think I can get to here. I apologize for that. Yeah. It is similar to a PERT chart, except a Gantt chart will show where bottlenecks are. and it will show the work that's been completed and the work that still needs to be completed. Now, the PERT chart won't do that. Sometimes, by the way, the PERT chart is sometimes referred to as a critical path method. And you notice that if you're looking at page 252, it's the second comment there in the margin. It talks about the sequence of tasks and the time needed, as we mentioned before. The Gantt chart's a little bit different. They're both used, by the way, you can do these with computers today, and you plug the information in, and it gives you the information that comes out both in work completed and work that still needs to be completed. And that brings me to the end of our discussion for production and operations management. What questions do you have that I can answer for you?
I think you did pretty. You did well.
I think you did pretty. You did well.
Okay.
You do extremely
Well,
well.
I think we're going to be into some interesting topics next week. We're going to talk about motivating employees, and you remember I got a little bit ahead of myself. Then we're going to go to very important. Not that any of this is not important, but very important chapter, and that's human resource management. And then finally, we're going to go into chapter 12. We're going to talk about unions, how unions started, and how unions are used today in the United States and things of that nature. So as always, I thank you for your attention.
Great.
If you have any,
thank you.
yeah, if
No,
you have
thank
any
you.
questions, didn't answer, please send me an email, and we'll be back next week on Monday at the regular time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right.
All
thank
right.
you. Good
Thanks
night.
a lot.
Good night.
Good night.